we gave you. Laura, I believe, just brought a bunch of cake. So you can definitely enjoy some cake as well. So as you should know, today's panel is focusing on trauma. So we do have 3 wonderful panelists and an amazing moderator here for you today as well. I just want to ask you, if you need to run to the back to get some food, just make sure to walk around the camera so you don't knock it over. We are recording this to share it with people as well. So I'm going to hand it over to Lisa, who'll give a little information about herself and then introduce the panelists.
All right, well, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Lisa Page. I'm a second-year student here at Silver. I currently intern at the Brooklyn VA, Bay Ridge. So welcome. Thank you so much for taking time out of your schedules, as well as the panelists for coming. And so we're just going to get started. So I want you all to introduce yourselves and tell me a little bit about what brought you to this career path. And anyone can start.
You want to go in order?
Okay. My name is Antonieta Contreras, and I'm a social worker. And I started working in an agency in Harlem when I finished my school as an outpatient clinician. And 95% of my clients were traumatized, hardly and deeply. And I didn't have much understanding and knowledge about trauma. So I saw how prevalent and how important it was to treat them with a specific understanding of trauma, what was happening to them in their mind and in their nervous system. So I went very deep into the trauma path, and I did a 2-year clinical program, and I have been training in different modalities, certified in several of them, and now I know how to treat them.
Very good.
My name's Diane Friedman. I got my PhD from NYU, and I started working. My first place of employment was at a health center during the time that HIV and AIDS was a death sentence. And my job was to do pre- and post-test counseling and to inform people of their test results. I also had a private practice slowly building at the same time, and I worked with the transgender population from a very early part. There's a lot of trauma involved in that. And then I took many courses to give me lots of things in my bag of what will fit each client. I am certified in EMDR. I'm certified in hypnosis. I've been doing a lot of work with mindfulness. After 9/11 on 9/12, I was doing critical incident stress debriefing in Manhattan with many of the people that were either in the World Trade Center or had friends in the World Trade Center. I then followed up with that, working for Project Liberty, working with people that were still affected from 9/11. And throughout my whole career, I've been working with adult survivors of insane childhood. No other way to say that. So.
Hello everyone, my name is Ikechi Wanko, and I actually work here at the Civil School of Social Work in the admissions office. And so I am one of the recruiters in the admissions office. I just think it's really interesting how many more people are here as opposed to the other panel on macro practice. So it's very interesting. A lot of my work coming into the work started when I was in college. I'm much younger, and through working in residential facilities, and that was my initial exposure to trauma as a whole. And kind of, I think the first part was the trauma that existed, but also the vicarious trauma as well, because I did that work then without any kind of supervision. So that was what was going on. And then going through that process, I kind of went into the community and did some wraparound work in child welfare, where there is a lot of trauma as well, where there's children being separated from their families, or families being separated from children. That in turn led me to grad school in social work. I did a 2-year program so I moved back to California to do work in the community with using applications of hip-hop in trauma, and that was the work I was doing, using hip-hop in trauma. And that was very unique and honestly very interesting. I did some work in substance abuse as well, where you see a lot of crossover and co-occurring disorders with mental health and substance abuse and people using substances to cope with the trauma. And eventually moved back to New York, and now I work here in that mission. So that's kind of been my journey, but I can answer questions as we go along.
All right, thank you all so much. So speaking of these vast, experiences with the trauma population, what skills do you all believe that are necessary to do successful work with this population from your experience?
Well, first and probably the most important is understanding the neuroscience of trauma, which means going into the nervous system and the brain functioning and all the alterations that come after a traumatic event, and understanding resilience as well, because not everybody that experiences a traumatic event becomes traumatized. So understanding that and not using trauma for whatever or for the event itself, but for the alterations that happen in the person, that then they become diagnosed with many different things that don't reflect exactly the situation of the client. So the other component is to be very compassionate about the suffering that they experience, and the long search for feeling normal. That is so hard for them. So those two components, I think, neuroscience and compassion.
I think one of the most important things is to know what trauma looks like. I was very amazed. I had a client that was seeing a psychiatrist for 6 years that was diagnosed bipolar. And when she came into me, I asked her basic questions, and she had no memory of her childhood. Total blackout from childhood. That, to me, is always a sign that there's something traumatic there. She was a survivor of incest and rape and horrible things for too many years that was never picked up because the psychiatrist only asks for symptoms and applies the medication to it. We've done a lot of work with EMDR. We do a tremendous amount of work. I mean, EMDR is very good for getting the person to process the trauma. But after that, I use a lot of work with mindfulness to help the person live in the present and recognize that that was the past. It's over. This is my life now. I don't know if that helps.
No, it certainly does. And for some of us who aren't aware, could you please kind of explain what EMDR is?
Eye movement, desensitization, reprocessing. And basically, Francine Shapiro, who I was lucky enough to train with because I'm that old, discovered this while she was a PhD student. And she discovered that with eye movement, it triggers memory. And it's grown tremendously since we used to do this type of thing in front of somebody. We've recognized that it's movement from the left part of the brain to the right part of the brain. Some people use clicking. I have discovered some wonderful music that goes from one side to the other side. And that triggers memory. The wonderful thing about EMDR is that the person sort of experiences the trauma again, but they're also, I remind them, they're watching it like a movie. So they're getting to process it from the present and yet experience it from the past. They don't have to tell me what's going on. I just have to be compassionate. And it's if you want to do trauma work, or I think anybody that goes into individual practice will have to do trauma work at some point in time, I would highly, highly, highly recommend studying that. Studying neuroscience. Dan Siegel out in California has some wonderful, wonderful work on mindfulness and changing the brain from trauma through mindfulness. Obviously, Bessa Vanderkamp has a tremendous amount of information about all the different tools that you can use to work with trauma. And Judith Herman, who her book was the book when I first graduated. So,
Thank you.
I would say part of just being self-aware in the work, because for me it's really a lot of it. It's really kind of what's happening to you as the clinician when you're in that space. So that interpersonal relationship between you and the client and what's going on. So it's being really self-aware about how much you're picking up and what you need to do for yourself at each phase. So listening to yourself also, and also being flexible. There are lots of different ways to work with trauma, and many are evidence-based, some aren't. But also just being flexible in your approach and having some kind of, sometimes each one of the skills in your tool bag, and knowing when to pull it out. Because I know you've heard a few examples here, but just kind of being flexible on which of those you're going to use, which applies to your client, which your client's more receptive to it. I think that's what I'm saying.
Thank you. And working with this population, I can only imagine that you guys have encountered some difficulties. So can you identify some of those, and how have you overcome those challenges working with this population?
How long we have? Well, there are different types of. For example, one is that because a lot of people don't know well how to treat trauma. Trauma has been developed, the understanding, recently. Before, the DSM-1, the 1 and 2, for example, only mentioned trauma as a physical injury. The three included PTSD, and finally, the 5 has 2 disorders that are developmentally based. So we have not had an understanding of trauma, so people get diagnosed with different type of labels, and they get medicated, and they really don't know what they are or what is happening to them. And that bringing labels to the room is difficult. Second, they have also a different type of experience with treatment. Adding to what here my friend said, trauma is probably the first disorder that we understand that needs to be, the treatment needs to be very structured and has 3 clear different phases. So she mentioned EMDR. EMDR is a modality that you're going to use at the end of treatment when the person has already learned how to regulate with the tools that you were mentioning, and then reach a stabilization, because the hyperactivation and hypoactivation, the sympathetic and parasympathetic, all those things that happen in the traumatized person cannot be, if you try to process a trauma memory, you are going to dysregulate the person and re-traumatize probably the nervous system. So it's a very, and because we are not used to have phases, sometimes they want to start processing. No, I want to talk about the rape. Calm down. We are not ready for you to bring those memories. And for example, dissociation is another huge problem in trauma treatment, because they have chunks of their lives completely erased, inaccessible. Not erased, but inaccessible to their awareness. So how are you going to treat that if they don't even remember? So do you remember in childhood being happy? No. You don't know, because there are years of their lives that they dissociated. So that's another challenge for me, for example.
One of the greatest challenges is taking care of yourself when you're working with people that have been through really horrific things. My best example of burnout was after 9/11. On 9/12, I came into the city. I did critical incident stress debriefing, which is one of the very first things that is done when somebody has just gone through a trauma, a recent trauma. And it's basically helping the person to talk about it and sort of bring it from here down to here. I followed that up working with Project Liberty, seeing several clients, and by December I was so burned out I couldn't sleep at night. And I was comfortable enough to pass my clients on to somebody that was bright and fresh and could handle it. Because it was just so much every single day that you need to know where your limits are. I will only take several severe trauma clients. I will not take more than 3 or 4 in my practice at a time, because it's as things are uncovered, depending upon the trauma, you can run into all kinds of diagnoses, from dissociative disorders and people that have been misdiagnosed, bipolar. Somebody experiencing a panic disorder can be diagnosed as manic. There's lots of misdiagnoses out there. But you got to take care of yourself. And there's even what I call secondary trauma. I remember working with a person that was in a plane crash. As she described, the luggage compartments opening up and falling down on top of people, and the cart running into somebody and breaking the stewardess's leg. And I was a little bit nervous on the plane the next time I got on. So I needed to take a deep breath and center myself into the present, just like I teach my people. The past is the past. What we have now in the present is what we need to concentrate on and work on. The third thing that happens during trauma is the identity of the person changes with the trauma. And helping that person learn to work on reformatting their identity into who they are, not what happened to them, if that makes any sense.
So just to piggyback on what you said about taking care of yourself, I think, so for me, I was here in New York during Hurricane Sandy, and I lived in the Lower East Side, and so that was a traumatic incident on its own for me, just given where I was. But I would say that, being in your own therapy, doing that process is really good and really helpful, whether it's peer supervision, but I think ideally being in your own treatment, in your own therapy, because some things that might be stuck and might not come out until later. You're like, oh, I have to process that, and it comes out much later. Maybe when you're in the session, you're finding things that thinking about, I guess I haven't gone through that. Really, I haven't gone through that. So that's something that I would, I think it's something that people might overlook in continuous therapy. Another thing is I think because someone is not diagnosed as having PTSD doesn't mean they're not traumatized, right? So they might not hit all the criteria for PTSD, but that doesn't negate the fact that this person has experienced a lot of trauma. So, and I know many of you might have seen that in your work already, that you have clients who don't hit the criteria for PTSD, but this person really is traumatized. So that's something else that I find as a challenge in terms of having a diagnosis to admit someone, something of that nature.
So can I add to that? Because I think you made a very important point. We normally think in trauma and PTSD being the same thing, right? And I mentioned that now we have diagnosis for developmental trauma. I think developmental trauma is much more important and more prevalent than PTSD. PTSD is what happens after an experience. Developmental trauma is what happens after many small little events of neglect, abuse, or like fear in childhood, from even before the concepts are in the brain. And those can also be poverty, discrimination, injustice. So developmental trauma is huge, and we normally think in PTSD, and we are trying to find an event. And no, it can be small events that traumatize severely a person.
And to recognize, if I can add on to that, with developmental trauma, the time of the trauma development stops in certain areas. So a major part of the therapy is helping the person to grow from that stage where they stopped developing.
Yeah.
And there's going to be lots of transference to you as the therapist, and lots of anger that also comes out to you as the therapist. Be careful with your countertransference, and recognize that they're not really angry at you, so don't respond to their anger, respond to what they're feeling and what is triggering that feeling at this time. That makes sense.
And to what you said about, the poverty and things of that nature, developmental trauma, I just listened to a podcast. I know they're so ubiquitous now, but it's The Hidden Brain. I don't know if you guys think it's The Hidden Brain, but it's on behavioral economics. And it's this one is specifically about, I think, being trapped in a tunnel. And it's really about how poverty is traumatic and how it influences your decision making. So poverty and bad decision making. That's really what the podcast was about. There were other aspects to it too, but that was the fundamental one that you talked about that, so I made me remember it. So I'm going to encourage you to listen to that and can see how that is related to trauma as well.
Mm-hmm. Well, thank you all for sharing those things. So given the heavy nature of this work, right, what are some positive aspects that you all gain from this work? What are positive experiences that resonate with you all? You can pick.
Well, before, for example, the DSM-4 or Axis 2, that they were not covered, and because they believed they didn't have a solution for them, they were incurable, right? With neuroplasticity and all this new understanding, now we know that many people in the Axis 2 are traumatized victims, victims of trauma, and that they can be cured. So that's the most amazing. I really love to see how they improve. I'm somebody that has had problems for 30 years, start changing behavior, and then having a completely different relationship with life. Mm-hmm. So it's really giving life back to these people, different from other problems like depression. Well, yes, also, but this trauma has so many implications that it really steals life from people. So yes, they can be cured.
If I think of the most positive end result, I had a student that was referred to me. She walked into a chemistry test, and 3 days later she had no idea who finished taking the chemistry test and what was going on, and then attempted suicide on the campus. She had so many traumatic experiences from the time that she was very young, repeated horrific stories. They felt that she might be dangerous, so they made her take a semester off from school. And during that time, we did some very, very, very intensive work, including Emdr and mindfulness. And the good news is she's met a wonderful man, is engaged, graduated college, is working very successfully in the field that she wanted to, and has no more flashbacks, and has been able to put all the pieces together, and has learned to really enjoy and live in the present. So, and lots of...
Go ahead.
No.
I was just thinking about mine. No, go ahead.
No, I was going to say there's lots of stories. When I was doing HIV testing, I had one person come in and say, I know I need to get tested, but I'm a prostitute. I know I have this disease, and I'm scared stiff, and after the work that we did, when her test came back negative, I continued to work with the trauma, and this person is now an MSW working somewhere. So you're working with people that are very broken down, and if you have the right tools, you don't mix what's going on with you with what's going on with them, you can experience amazing success in the work. You really can.
So for me, I think success is, I used to, so I started this training when I was in San Francisco, Oakland Bay Area. I'm using hip-hop to address trauma and get youth to engage. And, you know, I think the joy of that was when the youth said being a part of the training, helping me develop the training, finding music to develop my training. There was this one kid I worked with. He was, I think, at the time about 16, 17. He had been shot, and so at this point he was in a wheelchair. And so I used to take him. So I was working with a with a child welfare agency, and he had to go see his therapist. And so I was his clinician at that point. So I took him from his home and to his therapist, and we were supposed to have some engagement, communicate, and build some rapport. And he never wanted to talk to me. You know, so we went through the process of, you know, get into the car, get his wheelchair in the back of the car, get to his therapist, and the entire time we'll be in the car. I have music on. He never talked, but I listened, and I realized he always listened to the music. You know, you have his headphone on, you pull up the other one, and he would like nod along to the songs I played. So intentionally, I brought a song which I felt to resonate with him, which is a song by I think it's by T.I. With Justin Timberlake, and it's Dead and Gone. And so the very first verse of the song, when I was on a ride, I played it, and he just said, no, and he just pointed and said, that was what happened to me. And part of the song was sort of like being in the wrong place at the wrong time, and things going wrong, and you getting shot, and you end up in a wheelchair, which is just like what the song, the first verse of the song was about. And T.I. was obviously rapping about someone else, but he could relate to that experience. And so that was sort of how we broke ground and started talking. Because before then, he just didn't want to talk to me. Because I mean, he was this lot of trauma in this kid, obviously being shot and then being in a wheelchair, his whole loss around losing your legs and that ability at that young of an age. And so that was how we started our communication. And so and then we transitioned from there to back into the home. But it was a big story. But the point was that we started from that fundamental level of like of building rapport through music. You know.
Thank you. That's wonderful. So for students here, I was just wondering, what are your recommendations for classes or courses that you think would be beneficial for a student to take to be successful in this field?
I don't remember the syllabus, right? Because when I was a student here, which is not too long ago, there were no trauma classes whatsoever. So I don't know now. I think there are a couple, but I think that we and I am pushing. I'm the dean council, and to bring more classes. But if you can take on your own some neuroscience understanding, it's going to be so helpful for you.
To add on to that, I mentioned Dan Siegel a lot because he's one of the forerunners in connecting neuroscience to trauma. And he has a website. It's drdansiegel.com.
You know him, right?
Are you aware of him?
Attachment, like big in attachment, yeah. Mm-hmm.
He should be in your curriculum. He definitely should be in your curriculum.
Definitely.
When you're in school, it's hard to take other classes. The first thing I did after I graduated was I took hypnosis, then I took Emdr, then I took critical incidents, stress debriefing, all things geared towards trauma. I was working in the field of HIV and AIDS at that time before there was a medication to make it into a chronic illness, so I was dealing with trauma of knowing you're going to die soon trauma of parents finding out that their kids are either substance abusers or gay, which was very, very different in those days than now. So I went to as many different things as I could to learn. And that's what you really have to do, because you're going to get a foundation here. You're going to understand the basic concepts of, I know when I was here, it was very much into the three forms of, self and Freud, and I can't even remember that. But working, that's important.
No, attachment. Attachment is not what we need to go into. I don't think they have dynamic much anymore.
But that's all important because you need to understand the lingo. And what you're really doing is you're learning the vocabulary of the field that you're entering in. And then you can understand a lot of the clinical journals that are going more further advanced into this type of thing.
So let me explain a little bit. I'm recently graduated, like I graduated in 11, right? So the psychodynamic mind learned about defenses and blame almost the patient. Trauma has completely shifted that into, no, it's not a defense that the unconscious is trying to, and we don't blame them. Actually, we use now the defenses as a resourcing to bring, to make them feel empowered. So it has completely shifted from the past. So attachment, for example, understanding attachment, learn your attachment classes well, because that's the beginning of how people get traumatized, for instance, right? So those things, and the mindfulness that she has been mentioning, being present, that's the other shift. Dan Siegel, for example, I saw him here when I was a student with Cornfield. He gave a couple of days complete explanation of all the communion on attachment and trauma and being present. Mindfulness and know what it means to be present in the moment. That is also absolutely essential, and I don't know if you have those classes, take them. Yeah, because they are important.
One of my just to give a good example of mindfulness, one of my favorite examples was, I can't think of his name now, Oprah's guru.
Deepak
not
Chopra.
Deepak Chopra,
No?
the other one.
I guess.
At any rate,
Kabat-Zinn?
No. At any rate, he talks about being in a traffic jam. And you're in a traffic jam, you're supposed to be somewhere in 15 minutes, there are people in front of you, there are people behind you, there are people to the left of you, there are people to the right of you. You can honk your horn, you can use every four-letter word in the book, but the reality is, you can't go forward, you can't go backwards, you can't go sideways. Open your windows, enjoy the fresh air. Turn on the radio, listen to some music, wave to the people next to you. There's one commercial that I remember seeing where everybody gets out of their car and dances and in a traffic jam. But in life, we get into traffic jams, not necessarily always in a car, but we're in a place where we want to move forward, but we can't. It's absolutely impossible because of family things, personal things. And to be mindful to enjoy where you're at and find the benefits of it, and know that eventually you'll get to go where you want to go. So the traffic jam image is one that's really, really important. Another image that I use that is from Dan Siegel, he uses the image of the hub of a wheel and the edge of the wheel, and spokes. When you're in the hub of the wheel, you're mindful, you're in the present. The spokes are triggers that take you to where you're hanging on the edge. So very often I'll say to my clients, are you on the edge or are you in the hub? And if you're on the edge, what was the trigger that got you there? Okay.
And then Siegel explains all the neuroscience of mindfulness, which is the interesting part. So understanding what is happening, why is the activation comes to the prefrontal instead of the amygdala, blah, blah, blah. So that part is absolutely important to learn the neuroscience of it.
Thank you. Do you have any suggestions for
I mean, I know that in terms of, there are classes that focus on trauma and there's classes that focus on mindfulness, but I know Scott Whipple is really heavy on trauma. He talks about that a lot. He's an adjunct professor. So he's probably, I never took any of his trauma classes, but it's something that I think people enjoy, and they talk about it, and he does a lot of work with Emdr as well. So if you're interested in it, I would encourage taking that class.
Awesome, thank you. And we're winding down to just a few more questions. So really quickly, we kind of touched on this a little bit earlier, but what are some examples of self-care that you all practice, or suggestions for students here? Self-care.
Meditation. Daily, right?
Absolutely.
For example, yeah. Right.
Mindfulness always. I take lots of vacations. I love to travel, and it's hard work, and there's nothing better than going to some place where nobody knows you and just enjoying yourself and seeing the beautiful places around the world. And I try to do that as often as possible. I take breaks. I usually take a break 4 times a year because it's very, very difficult work. Even if it's a weekend away, it's away.
I even do it in the city. I go to a museum with my friends, and I take a vacation in my city because I need to disconnect from the problems of my clients.
Absolutely.
Right? So friends, a lot of friends.
Remember,
and more friends.
Don't let your life get entwined in your clients' lives. You have to remember that you're in a good place. Okay? And when you do therapy, you sort of have to travel to where they are to guide them back out, but you never stay there. Okay? Does that help?
So for me, it's a lot of movement, so whether it's dancing or exercising. Yeah, so that, I feel like there's a part of the work in terms of vicarious trauma that's in your head. There's a lot of it that's in the body. And so I used to do a lot of calisthenics, so that was just kind of my way of getting out. So people do yoga, dancing, any kind of running kind of movement, that really does help. But being a part of a group where there's peer supervision or individual therapy or even group therapy, I think group therapy is amazing.
Therapy always.
Yeah, therapy always.
Yes.
Yeah. Family.
Playing an instrument.
Yeah.
Knitting. Things that take you away, that you concentrate on, and you are mindful when you are doing it. You can't play an instrument unless you're totally within what you're doing. There's lots of different ways to being mindful and being in the moment. It's not just through type of thing. So. And
one more, I avoid the news. I have maybe an alert from time to time in my email, but I avoid going in and reading the news because we have enough, right? Like we don't need to expose ourselves to more misery.
I'm just going to cap that. On 9/11, every office that I went into, people were being re-traumatized because they had the news on. And I said, turn that off.
Yeah.
Put on music and bring your life closer to the people that are important and stop going back there. They were the news was horrible. They were re-traumatizing, and the news continues to re-traumatize people. How many people have watched that poor guy being pulled off of the plane at least 15 times? Or the kids that were hit with the gas. We don't need to see that. We need to know that it existed. We need to stand up for social justice, but we don't have to keep on watching the atrocities.
Thank you. And a final question before we turn the questions over to the audience. What is one takeaway that you would like to leave the students with regarding your trauma work?
One thing.
I'm going to say you have to know how to take care of you before you can do work with trauma. Otherwise, you're going to fall into the pit with your client.
I would say you're never too busy for self-care. And matter how many, no matter what's going on, God's intentionally planted in there. You know, even if it's like, you know, you're getting back from work, get off the subway 2 stops earlier and just walk. That's better than not doing anything. You're never too busy for self-care. That's probably it.
Never stop being curious. This profession is still evolving, it's still developing. We haven't finished learning what's going on with the brain, what's going on with emotions, personality, blah, blah, blah. There is no one modality that has the answer, and there is no one way to see a disorder or a dysfunction. So be curious and keep reading and keep adding to your understanding and contribute. And contribute, because there is a lot still to be developed. Right now, I got certified in a modality that is called neurofeedback. I don't know if you have heard of it. Yeah. So I'm doing neurofeedback. I've been doing for 2 years. Amazing results. It's a brain-based modality that is the first stage for self-regulation. It organizes the brain and regulates the affect, and then you can move on with other type of modalities. It's amazing, and it's only a few years ago, couple of years ago, that trauma people are using it, and makes up an amazing difference. I had, for example, a paranoid client, 30 years pursued, like chased by shadows, and in maybe 5 sessions, the paranoia stopped and has not come back. You know, it's amazing things. So be curious and learn more and investigate what is going on. Because, yeah, there's still, we can contribute to.
I'll tag on to that.
Yeah.
There's so much research going on in the brain, and the last 5 years they have discovered parts of the brain that they didn't think do anything that now they know can restructure. You have to stay up with the science of trauma. Bessel van der Kolk, Dan Siegel, I'm trying to think.
Porges is important. Porges is a very new approach of, very different. So the survival mechanisms of trauma, how the first one is social engagement, and that is wired from day one. So in the moment that a kid feels pain or something, immediately looks for somebody. That's the first mechanism. When that fails, then it's mobilization, and the third is immobilization, when you go into dissociation and things like that, and how they have a hierarchy. And so you have many, many new contributions for trauma that involve neuroscience.
Thank you. Well, thank you all so much. This has been a very rich conversation. So now I'm going to open up to the audience. If you all have any questions, ask away.
Were very helpful talking about like self-care and music work. I understand that on an intellectual level. And I don't think that I speak only for myself when I say I think that especially as we're beginning, it feels very difficult to give yourself that permission. And is that a hurdle that you guys had to get over? Like, or how? And if so, how would you do that?
Burnout makes you learn how to do that real quick. There's a wonderful app that you can download on your phone called Headspace, and it's give me 10 minutes and I'll give you 10 minutes of mindfulness. And everybody can find 10 minutes in a day. You also, working as a clinician, need to be very aware of yourself and how you are responding to your clients. If you are reacting to your clients, you're burned out. It means you're not taking care of yourself. So however, whether it's playing music, whether it's dancing, I just took up tap dance, that's really whatever you do for you, getting together with your family, with loved ones, getting away from that is very important. And you'll know by how you're responding to the people you're working with whether you need a break. And when you need a break, listen to it. Okay? You deserve it. If you can't give it to yourself, how are you going to convince your clients to?
think for me, there's part of, finding family, and, a lot of my friends are social workers. When I was with my friends, we were talking about social work and all of that, which is helpful, in its own way. But when I was with my family, social work in my family, we talked about everything but social work, and I kept it that way. There was that. And in finding time, like you said, when you do burn out, you're forced to find that time, but you want to stop that from happening. For me, I was much younger. I was in college. I was going to school full time. I was working full time. I was at a residential facility, and at that period, I was dreaming about my clients, and that hasn't happened again since that point. So the thing about it is that I wasn't getting supervision. I wasn't taking care of myself. I was like 20 years old, 21, and so I didn't know what's going on. Now I know. So, after that, working with my clients onward, I wasn't dreaming about them, So it's just that you really want to find a way before that happens. So, like you're saying, 10 minutes.
Learn your physical response to being overwhelmed. I find when my shoulders start to go up to my ears, that's when I need to really take a break. Learn what that is for you. When I'm doing this, I'm getting too into me, and I gotta to get out of myself.
And that's a really good point, because for me, physiological response is shortness of breath. Like I'm not breathing all the way in. I'm like, okay, I need to go run or do something, and so I can move and get my breath back. And so that's.
There is one guy called Alan Shore. He talks about the right and the left hemisphere, and how we imitate, how affect is contagious, right? So I was working at a hospital, a city hospital in the psychiatry, pretty intense. And one day I just noticed that I was thinking, life sucks, there is no purpose on doing anything. I said, who is talking? I couldn't even recognize my voices, internal voices. I don't even think they were mine. But I went to therapy the day after, immediately. I said, I need to listen to what is happening to you, because I didn't want to leave my bed, and I was not burnt out or depressed. I was just I don't know. I went immediately. Yes, overwhelming. I went immediately to therapy, and and learned that need to be careful on how much you absorb from your clients.
And you're going to hear some really painful, horrific stuff.
And
worse than you ever imagined.
In the room.
And you have to be with the person and their pain. That's part of the therapy. But not to be in the pain.
We will hear it.
I have a two-part question. As someone who's going to graduate in a few weeks, you all were mentioning trainings after school, which I completely agree with. And I was wondering if you have any recommendations for that. I know somatic experiencing is very popular, but it's a 3-year program. And then I was wondering if you had any recommendations for training. And then also professionally, if you want to work with trauma, what should you look for in a job placement? I'm guessing supervision, but is there anything else?
My first response is you're going to work with trauma whether you want to or not.
Yeah.
Because you're working in a field where most people have had traumatic experiences. I would say, after leaving from here, I probably would look at some of Bessel van der Kolk's work, because he gives you a very good overview of trauma right now. Pessy, I think, is the name of one of the teaching things. He's got a video on there of a 8-hour training that is very, very good, that doesn't go too deep, but gives you a very good overview. Talks about all the different modalities. Certainly reading Judith Herman, she was the first one. Dan Siegel might be too far ahead. And EMDR, you might want to wait a bit before you do that. But that's 2 separate trainings for 2 weekends. It's not enormous. And be careful, because there are some people doing some weird things that are not EMDR that they're calling EMDR based. So just.
So I'm a training jockey. I have, like, I don't know, 10 different modalities that I have taken, and still didn't feel prepared. Supervision, yes, supervision is essential, and if you are going to go to an agency, supervision is not the best that you can get. So training, yes, it is a solution, and not only on modalities, but a training institute with a structured program, with a clinical program. I went to a 2-year program that has individual supervision, group supervision, and processing groups, besides the didactic. So it was so formative, because I really was able to bring my cases to somebody that understood trauma and told me. The other modalities, you only go and practice that day. There's 3 years, but to get certified, so it has somatic experiences. But you can go to the first one, that is several weekends, and have enough tools. Those modalities give you enough tools for interventions. Because in trauma, you are not the type of therapist that just allow the client to talk. You do a lot of psychoeducation, and you provide with a lot of techniques for them to regulate and to learn to identify triggers, to learn to listen to their body. You are always giving them ways to learn how to manage their symptoms. So you need those tools, and trainings give you the tools. So yeah, and in terms of supervision, it's so useful to become part of a community. That's the other thing. We are lonely, right? Social workers is a kind of a lonely profession. So going to a training gives you a community and people that are interested in the same things that you are. So there are peer supervision groups that you can form after. It's very, very good. Of course, save money. They cost a lot. But training is a very, very useful thing. And whatever you want to specialize. And in trauma is absolutely necessary.
The New York State Society for Clinical Social Work also offers supervisionary kind of thing. I forget what they call it, where the long-term social worker oversees the newbies.
You can call it a mentorship.
Yeah, mentorship. Thank you. That offers a mentorship program. And if you're going to do clinical social work, you want to belong to that society. It gives you every bit of information. They have wonderful websites that feed you information and connect you with the clinical social workers around New York.
Can you remind me, it was called the
New York State Society of Clinical Social Work. I'm surprised they haven't come here to recruit. They used to when I was here all the time.
Thank you. Yes, last question.
I was curious what you guys thought about for group work for people who experience trauma. I work with people and have experienced self-pregnancy loss and have found that sort of like peer support group work can be really beneficial, but also it can be triggering for people. So I guess I'd just be curious, like in different population, if you guys have experience with that and have found it to be helpful or.
Shame is a huge component on trauma, especially in developmental trauma. So it's hard to do group because even you mentioned that in the Emdr, when people are processing the memories, so the memories get all chopped up and inaccessible when trauma happens. The ones that should be short-term goes into long-term, automatic things. So when you are doing EMDR, you are kind of going to those memories. And some very painful things appear to them for the first time in years, right? They don't even say the things. I tell my clients, and you mentioned the same, don't tell me. You don't need to tell me the whole content because it's so shaming. So, even if they don't tell it to the therapist, just imagine in a group. Depends, like maybe yes, losing a baby is not shaming, but depends on the traumas. All the big, like sexual abuse and all the, right, are
In most of the groups that I know that deal with loss of a spouse and that type of thing, they tell you to wait 6 months before you can join the group. And that should be 6 months of doing individual counseling. You have to be ready to go into a group for the group's sake and for your sake. So I wouldn't see it. The only thing that I say, critical incident stress debriefing. Everybody has experienced trauma together. That is a very good process to helping people bring the trauma down together. But after that, it's got to be individual.
And loss has a process in itself first, right? The loss, if it's not a traumatic loss is kind of, what's the name, bereavement? And bereavement groups, there are many bereavement groups, and that's not necessarily a traumatic loss. So you first take care of the bereavement, and then you can go into the trauma.
But trauma is
work.
loss.
Sometimes, not necessarily, right? Mm-hmm.
Yes, I mean, I've done some work with adolescents in groups, and so when they, obviously when they're graduating, they come into the group, but it's always generally been around child welfare students and kids, not just students that work here, but clients who either experience a kind of loss, trauma, displacement, because of foster care. A lot of times they feel isolated because they're maybe usually in one county or one area of the city, and they might not realize that someone with that shared experience even exists, right? So part of it is once the group kind of getting them together into a group and seeing that there are people who have that same shared experience. The group necessarily isn't shaped around trauma. It's definitely a process group processing their experiences, but you can't help when trauma is going to come up. Like when things are you can't help it. It can't come up whenever. So I think part of it is knowing that can happen, and I think I'm more open depending on what it is, because I mean some things are are harder to manage, but generally things can just come up whenever. So it's also being prepared and being able to manage those things when they do come up.
Yeah, that's the tricky part. Trauma doesn't depend on the event, depend on the resilience of the people, right? So if you get together for one event, well, you are going to have traumatized people and people that are okay, that want to talk about something else of the event or the consequences on their lives, but not in the consequences on their nervous system. Yeah. So the resilience is probably the part that, independently of the event, you find a group where they can build resilience or help you building resilience. That would be more adequate.
Thank you so much. This has been a really fruitful discussion. Unfortunately, we're out of time. Let's do a round of applause for our panelists.